Hello, explorers, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For more than 25 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens through virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and today we are reconnecting live with Reach the World Explorer and Fulbright U.S. student program grantee Julia Davies, who is joining us from Belgrade, Serbia. Julia has been doing an incredible job of sharing her experiences exploring peace and conflict resolution through the lens of her work in multiple countries, and currently Serbia. I've added, or I'm about to add, the link to the chat to Julia's Reach the World Virtual Exchange Journey homepage, and you can find all of her published articles and photos there. We are going to touch on a couple of them today, so after our conversation, if something we discussed sparks an interest in you, just know that there is much more at Julia's Virtual Exchange homepage. A very warm welcome to all the teachers and students who are joining us today, especially our friends in Michigan, who will be joining us on screen a bit later to ask Julia their questions. And without further delay, I think we should dive into it and travel virtually to Serbia in Eastern Europe. And welcome Julia to the screen. Hey,
Hi.
Julia. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It is wonderful to see you again. How have you been since we last connected with you?
I've been good. I've been traveling a bit, just around the region. I went back to Sarajevo, and yeah, I'm in classes and been good.
Fabulous. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad you started with the topic of where you've been traveling because you've been very busy, and I thought it might be helpful for us to just start by looking at a map of where you are, just so we can put like a place with a name. Tell us where you are, please, and sort of where you've been recently. I know you've been to a couple countries.
Yeah. So I'm in Serbia, which is in the center of the map. In Belgrade is the capital. And I was in Sarajevo, so that drive is about 5.5 hours. By bus, it takes like 8. But you can fly for an hour and a half. But I have also been to Croatia, down on the coast to Split and Dubrovnik, which are both on the coast, and then also to Osijek, which is a small town closer to the border with Serbia. And then I've been to most of these countries, but recently I was in Tirana. I was in Rome, which, again, is a close flight. There's a lot of connecting flights between Rome and Tirana. And then I was in Sofia also, which is about a 5-hour drive from Serbia as well. And I will be going to Romania tomorrow, actually, in Timisoara, which you can also see. I'm like pointing, but you can see it on the map. It's also close to the border. So I try to stay within like driving distance because it's just easier than the hassle of getting onto a plane and going through airport security. But yeah, that's where I've been.
So if we zoomed out a little bit more, we would see that this area of the world is Eastern Europe, and further to the east you have sort of Russia and China, Mongolia. Further to the south you have Turkey and Asia and Northern Africa, and then further to the west you have Western Europe. Of the places you've been recently, and I think this is a short list: Bulgaria, Croatia, Italy, Albania. Do you have a place you went to where something surprised you, or you learned something, you ate something, you heard something, you learned something that surprised you?
Yeah. So in Albania, there's a very heavy like post-communist influence because it was under communist rule for decades. And I did know about that, but I don't know much about the history of Albania. So that was definitely interesting. In Bulgaria, I was surprised how similar the languages between Serbian and Bulgarian are. People could kind of understand me, and like the months are the same, and I'm pretty sure the numbers are the same. A lot of the Slavic languages sound pretty similar. So Russian sounds similar. I've just been able to tell the difference recently. So that's a milestone for me. But yeah, I was surprised by how similar the languages were and the overlap of cultures, just like in these like Balkan states.
All right. And when you are traveling on the ground between these countries, are you going up and over mountains or over flat fields, or what does the landscape look like in this region of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously varies, but so for example, on the drive from Belgrade to Sarajevo, it's very mountainous. Sarajevo is surrounded by mountains. A bit of Serbia has mountains, not really that much around Belgrade, but I would say, yeah, it's pretty mountainous. So is Bulgaria. I went up to the Rila Monastery north of Sofia, and that was in the mountains. So yeah, mountainous, cold. Not as cold as Michigan, but definitely cold.
All right. Yeah, I think we'll have to ask our students later, but I'm guessing they got some snow this week. Do you see snow up in the mountains?
Yes, there is in the mountains, but not in Belgrade where I'm at. So.
All right. Well, you have traveled extensively in this region. That's cool because you can give us a great perspective on, a lot of countries that share borders with each other and have in the past had conflicts that have, are still being processed in the region. You, in one of your great Reach the World articles, link in the chat, talk about a 28-hour bus ride that you took from the Netherlands to Bosnia. And I know that wasn't especially recently, but you talk about it in the context of getting comfortable with discomfort. I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm just going to disclaim that I wouldn't recommend doing that. There's definitely easier ways to get around Europe and probably cheaper. I just didn't travel much before then, and that was what I found to do. But basically, I was coming from Rwanda and I was spending a month in Europe solo traveling for my first time. And I was looking at this internship in Sarajevo. And I was interviewing with the guy I would end up working for, but nothing was definite. And I think if I didn't end up going at that time, I wouldn't have ended up doing the internship because it really just showed my dedication for doing that and for moving there. But yeah, so it was definitely hard in the sense of I was sitting on a bus for 28 hours. I didn't really know where I was going. My phone lost service, and it definitely wasn't the safest thing to do. But I think the decision of me actually going and doing it put me in this uncomfortable zone that wasn't in the alarm, which I talk about if you read the article. But basically this discomfort zone is pushing you yourself to do things that you wouldn't normally do and that are a bit challenging and you're not entirely comfortable. But not too far that you feel unsafe or you're super worried and then you're not really learning anything. So getting in that middle zone where you're trying new things, pushing yourself, that's where you really grow and change as a person. And that's personally why I love traveling, is because you're kind of constantly in that discomfort zone. So even little things not knowing the language or I get a menu here and it's in Cyrillic and I can't read it because I can't read Cyrillic yet. And it's just little things that you're constantly uncomfortable, and it just forces you to become a better or different person and grow. So, I mean, if I compare the 3 months I was in Rwanda with constantly new things happening to me compared to my 3 years at Ohio State, I grew and changed so much as a person in that condensed amount of time, just because I wasn't constantly surrounded by, things that made me comfortable. But all that to say, it is still important to have that comfort zone to go back to. And also, you don't have to travel and go on a bus ride for 28 hours to do that. You could do it in your everyday life. Make a new friend, go to a place you wouldn't normally go, try something new. Even if in the moment you don't want to do it, that's probably when you know it's something you should do, because later on you'll end up looking back and be happy you did it.
Fabulous. That's such great perspective. And you're talking about this in the context of travel and the life-changing benefits of travel. But I can think of 5 things in my day yesterday where I was thinking, I don't really want to do that. That sounds hard. I'd rather not. And I knew that doing it would be a growth opportunity. Do you, on a daily basis in Serbia, what's the most challenging thing for you? The thing that you keep doing again over and over because it's good for you?
I would definitely say the language. It's for some or not for some reason, I think a lot of people agree with this. I feel like embarrassed to practice my language because people speak such good English here, and they usually just change back to English because their English is better than my Serbian. So I think last year I wouldn't push myself and just be like, okay, we'll talk English, like this is easier. But I just like keep trying to speak Serbian back, and then they'll still answer in English, and then eventually they'll try Serbian, or just outright saying like, I'm trying to learn Serbian, so can we please speak it? And people will normally say yes, but I don't do that every day. I should do it more. But it is easier, obviously, just to speak in English. But
all right, great. Yeah, great advice. Can you talk about these three categories of comfort zone, alarm zone, and discomfort zone as it relates to conflict resolution and sort of talking about difficult topics within sort of your study of work?
Yeah. I briefly said it before, but these are also kind of arbitrary. They're just like easier ways to think about this. But you have your comfort zone. And so that's something you would do every day, or just like your normal routines, things that make you feel safe. I guess like an example would be like going to like a coffee shop you always go to, or, your friendship that you've had for 10 years. And then you have the alarm zone, which is farther out. And then that would be something that like makes you feel unsafe, and it's too uncomfortable for you. You're not really learning anything. You're kind of in that like fight or flight mode. And then you have your discomfort zone, which is like the like sweet spot, like the middle, where you're being challenged and you're definitely not comfortable and you're doing something new, but not to the point where you feel unsafe and you're just trying to like get out of it. So I think going in with that intention of like, this will be hard and I'm going to do it anyway, is like how you get into that discomfort zone. And to relate it to like the dialogue work, which is where I pulled this from, of what I did in Sarajevo. A lot of times when you're dealing with conflict or just these like difficult topics, you have to be okay with going into that discomfort zone and talking about topics you don't want to talk about. And that doesn't mean to, just like go to your Christmas dinner and like start talking about politics. That could probably be like that could probably be the like alarm zone. But ways of doing it where you're talking about things that you don't want to talk about, but you should. And you can do that mostly with and like control it. So do it with people you trust. And to instead of just like avoiding conflict and constantly being in that comfort zone, to constructively deal with conflict, you do need to get uncomfortable and go into that discomfort zone.
All right. You have lived in a number of places that are still processing some major conflicts from the past. That a big part of the identity is like trying to learn to move on from very, very like bad war situations, civil war in some places. And you talk in one of your articles about empathy. And I wonder if you could just talk some more about how you've seen, how can people build empathy for people who are very different from them through this sort of global lens? Like maybe share a story with us from Rwanda, if you would, or any of your sort of work in Eastern Europe that talks about empathy.
Yeah. I think empathy is a pretty complicated topic, but the best way I think to build empathy for someone else is to just put yourself in that person's situation as best as you can, or try to imagine yourself as that person, which is like common advice. But to actually do it, I always find myself, one, it's challenging in the moment to do. And it's often when I'm like looking back on situations that I'm like, oh, I could have reacted better if I would have just, thought about how that other person was feeling. And trying to, integrate that more into the moment before you react. And I think the best way to do that on a larger scale, so between groups of people and not just on that interpersonal level, is to just really imagine that group's perspective or stories that they were told growing up. And I would say an example of this here, some girl I knew was talking about this book that a nonprofit here, I talked about in one of my first articles, wrote. And I think I'm not sure the name of the book, but it has different stories from Croatia, from Bosnia, and then from Serbia on the same topics. And it's written from the perspectives of each of the different countries and how they teach and interpret their history. And I think by seeing all of those stories back to back, you can compare why certain people here believe certain things or have these different identities. And not just in these isolated incidents, which is why I think my experience here is so cool, because I was able to live in Bosnia for a year and now I'm in Serbia. And hopefully I can go to Croatia for a prolonged time and just keep traveling the Balkans and getting those perspectives, which is also why a lot of the nonprofits here do a lot of regional exchanges, because there is so little travel between countries here since the breakup of Yugoslavia and the lack of government cooperation. And it's really important for people to meet each other and hear their stories. And when you can like meet in person, you're able to hear like those perspectives from a personal level and not just from this like top down, like stories you hear in the news or from your government. So yeah, I think just being open to hearing other people's perspectives from like a learning posture and not like applying what you think is right. So just like actively trying to understand an alternative perspective.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for that. Two last things I want to touch on before we hopefully get some student questions on something that you've spoken about so far this morning. You talked a little bit about kids and kids' sort of involvement in this process in two different respects. You brought up in one of your articles an organization called the Youth Initiative for Human Rights, which I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about. And also you visited a museum in Sarajevo called the War Childhood Museum, which if you could touch on those two things, and our students who are waiting patiently can be thinking about some questions, we'll turn it over to you after that.
Okay. Yeah, the Youth Initiative for Human Rights is a nonprofit organization based in Belgrade, but it has offices all around Yugoslavia. And they were actually the ones that had that book that I was just talking about. And I have some classmates that work there. And they deal with youth, but like more like youth defined by like 18 to 30, so young adults, I would say, and just getting them involved in political work here and advocacy. So they organize a lot of protests. And they do these regional cooperations, which is really great because, like I said, opening up perspectives and giving students and youth here the opportunity to go and travel to other countries and meet students and other people their age that have different perspectives and from different countries and build those relationships, I think is like a pillar of peace building, especially in the Western Balkans. And then the War Childhood Museum focuses on peace building work recently, but it was originally established in, I think, 2018. And it shows the story of war from a child's perspective. And it is recently expanded to other conflicts outside of the Balkans, but it started in Sarajevo and got stories from that region. And now it has, an exhibit on Ukraine, an exhibit on Gaza. And through the perspective of the war's most innocent victims, children, we can we can all agree that it is no child's fault for war that's going on or any type of conflict. We can kind of move past those ethnic or religious or different types of identity and political stuff to recognize the damage that war does to generations of children. So, for example, in this museum, it'll just say that the child's first name and, not give the last name, which would give away the ethnicity or the political affiliation. And it's just like blanketed statements. So you can really just focus on that war is destructive and bad and not talk about the other stuff related to it, which is important to talk about, but recognizing that is equally as important.
Absolutely. And I've put the link in the chat to your amazing album from your visit to that museum. I've also put a link to your article about getting comfortable with discomfort, which I thought was amazing. All for some further investigation after we're finished here today. I want to see what sort of questions we have from some students who are watching today. We'll bring on Mrs. Yerk and her students in Michigan. Hi, Mrs. Yerk. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you have any brave souls who are want to ask a question to Julia? There's really nothing off the table today in terms of getting to know Julia, what she's doing in Serbia, and any part of her work.
Let's see if we have any questions. Any questions, guys? High schoolers that are very shy this morning. Turn the camera around here.
Good morning. Any questions you have for Julia? She would love to answer any questions you have about her work. I'm sure some aspect of what she's spoken about this morning prompted something of interest in you.
I know some of them were curious about Julia's age, if she doesn't mind sharing her age.
Yeah, I'm 23.
Okay, so she's 23, guys.
How many languages does she speak?
Oh, could you hear the question, Julia?
No, I didn't.
How many languages can you speak?
Oh, English and bad Serbian is, but Bosnian, Serbian, and Croatian are pretty much the same language. You can't say that to people here, but it's like the same. So learning one, you can kind of say you speak three, but not really.
Nice, good question.
And Julia, where did you just remind us again where you grew up in the U.S.?
I grew up in New Jersey, in Monmouth County, but I went to school at Ohio State, so I lived in Columbus before coming here.
Oh, well, Ohio's kind of our rival.
I know.
So one of the students just said, "Go blue." Any other questions we can think of right now?
Did she ever miss home?
He asked if you ever miss home.
I will right now with the holidays for sure. Like I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I'm not going home for Christmas. But other than that, I don't really miss home. But holidays for sure I will.
Julia, at what point did you really get interested in this kind of work? And at what point did you get to have your first travel experiences that seem like they sort of waterfalled into spending more and more time abroad?
Yeah. Honestly, the first time I went abroad for a prolonged time was to Rwanda, which was, I would recommend going to Europe first or something. But I always loved to travel with my family growing up, going on vacation, just around the States or, to Mexico and stuff. But I never did any Mexico's international, but not to Europe or any time abroad really. And then when I was in Rwanda, I loved it. I loved traveling all around the country and experiencing new things. And then that brought me to Sarajevo and now here.
And can you talk just a little bit about the Fulbright program? Because you're abroad in Serbia because of a grant from the Fulbright program. What is that? What's that all about? How do you get a Fulbright grant?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome because they cover everything for a year. And you can apply to any country. It is harder to go to countries that people want to go to more. So a Fulbright to France is much harder than a Fulbright to Serbia. So if you just want to go abroad and you don't care where, you could apply to an African country or Serbia. But you can teach English, which about half of the students or half of the applications do. And which is pretty, I wouldn't say easy, but it gives you more time to do other things. So you can teach English, or you can get a research grant and you can just do open research, or you can get your master's, which is what I'm doing. It's a year-long master's program. And yeah, you just apply and you could do any three. It's pretty competitive. And most universities will offer through their fellowship department help writing the application. So not to talk about Ohio State again, but they have a really good fellowship program to help you get that. But I'm sure Michigan has a great one as well. And yeah, it's like any other fellowship application. There's tons of fellowships. It's you write essays and you have to get letters of recommendation. And I took a lot of time to write mine, about 8 months it took me to write it and keep editing it. And yeah, it's just kind of based on what money they have available. And it's kind of like college applications where there is a little bit of luck. But it's important to show, if you also pick a country, having some relation to that country is important. So if you have family from there, or like me, I would like live somewhere near it. But yeah, you want to show that you like have interest and you're not just picking the country because it's easy to get the Fulbright too, if that makes sense.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions from our student audience? I have thousands of questions for Julia. I will ask my questions to her all day, but I want to give you the chance.
Anybody able to think of anything else that you would like to know?
What's the place that she hopes to travel to someday?
Okay, so another student asked what place you'd like to travel to someday.
I really want to go to Turkey. I've just been to like the Istanbul airport, but I really want to go there. I'm going to Germany the end of the month for the first time, so that should be fun. But yeah, I would say Turkey.
Why Turkey?
There's a lot of Turkish influence in Bosnia, a lot of Turkish people, and there's a lot of cooperation between the two governments. And I really like Turkish food and like Turkish desserts. And my mom's half Armenian, so I have some like history in that region.
I'm going to bring up the map again just so we can see how far away that is from you. From Belgrade to Istanbul, you can see Istanbul in sort of the lower right corner, right? And that's the gateway to Turkey.
Yes.
How would you get there, Julia, from where you are?
I would fly. It might be better to fly from Sarajevo, but that's the cool thing about here is like you can just if you can get like a car to any of the capital cities, there'll be like cheaper flights. So sometimes I'll like drive to a different capital just to take a flight from there.
Excellent. That raises a question in me of like, do you have to exchange money to go to these different countries, or are they using the same currency, or like how do you pay for things when you go to any of these different countries?
Yeah, most countries will take card besides like public transportation. But yeah, they all pretty much have different currencies, which is the nice thing about Europe because it's all like European Union. So yeah, like I'll have like 3 currencies in my wallet usually at once. But yeah, you could always just exchange, and I have like a great bank that will refund you for any ATM like charges. So it's not a big deal for me to exchange money.
Nice.
Great. Any other questions?
Anybody else? Thinking.
No.
Nothing yet.
Great. Well, I think this hopefully planted some seeds, and I put some links to some of Julia's amazing articles in the chat, which I highly encourage you to check out because not only do they expand on what she said today, but they include some pictures of places like the War Childhood Museum, which I found really moving. Julia, I just one sort of final question for me, like if compared to like living in Ohio, for example, what is the cost of living like between Bosnia, sort of the Balkans area, and maybe generally speaking, and Ohio? Like, is it about the same?
No. Bosnia is much cheaper to live than Serbia because of the war in Ukraine. There's a lot of Russian immigrants here, so housing prices is pretty expensive. I mean, not comparable to the U.S. So for a 1-bedroom apartment here, I pay about $600. And then in Columbus, like a 1-bedroom apartment would be like $1,200, $1,500 a month. So it is much cheaper to live. And then like food and like drinks and stuff like that is like significantly cheaper. So like a beer here is like $2.50, and like in Ohio it would be like $8 or $10. So yeah, it's much cheaper to live here. But if you go to like anywhere in Western Europe or like the European Union, it'll be similar prices to the U.S.
All right. And what do you want to do next? Like I know you've got a bunch of time still on your Fulbright grant. You'll be in Serbia for a while still. Like, what are you hoping to accomplish during your remaining time in Serbia?
Yeah, I hope to graduate on time and defend my thesis and just keep traveling. So yeah, the master's is a year, but usually people take 2 years to do it, but I only have funding for a year. So I'm trying to finish all that within the year.
What does that look like for your daily life? Are you in class all day long? Are you like packing 2 years worth of classes into I mean, you are into a year, but like, what does that look like?
No, I mean, it's more of like you write a thesis, which is like 60 to 70 pages. And that usually takes like a year on itself because you're supposed to do like some type of research alongside of it. But no, I just have classes twice a week. I currently have no classes because there's a protest going on, which is nice to not have classes. But yeah, just twice a week for like 8 hours a week. It's mostly just independent work than class time.
All right, very good. Well, I think we get a good sense of your everyday life in Serbia. Any other questions before we sort of wrap things up here?
I don't know if the students have any other questions. I know I have a couple. Anybody have any questions before I ask her mine? So you mentioned your thesis. Some of our students here are familiar with college. They've taken some college courses. So I think that they may have heard of a thesis before in terms of college, but not really understanding the magnitude of it. So you said your thesis will be 60 to 70 pages, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys hear that? So what is your thesis topic?
So my undergraduate thesis was on the role of memorialization and state-sponsored histories in Rwanda. So it was separated into 3 parts. In the first part, I just did like an analysis of like published history of Rwanda. And then I did an analysis on how the state currently portrays the history through memorials. And then I compared that to like interviews I did with people that remember what happened or stories told about what happened from their relatives. And yeah, so I'm not exactly sure what my thesis here will be on, but it will be related to the distrust that people in Serbia have with civil society here, and looking at like the rise of nationalism and Western funded nonprofits here.
Okay. And you mentioned that there is a protest happening right now, so you can't attend your classes. What is the protest about?
So in Novi Sad, which is the second biggest city in Serbia, there's like a train station that most people use to get to Belgrade. It's been around, it was built in like 1960. And then a couple years ago, they did renovations on it. But there's a lot of government corruption here. So normally these contracts get given to people that know someone in government and they're not totally qualified. And this is what happened when they did the renovations 3 years ago. And then a couple weeks ago, the train station collapsed and 15 people were killed. And yeah, so there's been protests since then at all the faculties around Belgrade and in Novi Sad, demanding that people related to like whoever hired this company to do the renovations be fired.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Any questions that you guys can think of before she goes? No.
Julia, how do you interact with protests like that? Is it like an interesting sort of academic study for you to like watch what's unfolding in Serbia and the issues that are presented? Do you participate in the protests? How do you look at it when you're like someone from the United States who's living and studying in Serbia, but also wanting to really integrate in a new place or in a different place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because you have people that are older and they're talking about what like the protests, because these are mostly student led, so younger people, and they're like, it's admirable, but like we did this before and like nothing will happen, like nothing will change here, which is also just kind of sad. But at the same time, it is like, inspiring that students are still willing to protest and do something about it, even with a lot of people telling them it won't matter or won't do anything. But no, I have not joined in on the protests. I'm not sure like exactly what's going on. I know some people were arrested, so I'm gonna not go to them, but yeah.
Good call. That's that. Would you say that is alarm zone? You're gonna stay away from the alarm zone?
Sure. Yikes.
All right. Well, Mrs. York's class, thank you so much for joining us to start your day. It's nice to see you all. I hope you have a great day of school, and thanks for your great questions. Before we say goodbye to you, can you just give Julia a big wave and thanks before we move you backstage?
Give her a wave, guys. Turn around the camera, wave, big wave.
Thank you. Hopefully.
All right.
Of course. Thanks for being here today. All right, Julia. Well, that was Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of that additional context. It's exciting to me that we can really like dive into your interesting work in Serbia now that we've met you and learned more about you. And we have a couple more articles to go, I think, on your virtual exchange, but we'll be wrapping up soon. I have put your Journey homepage link in the chat, as I mentioned, and would highly encourage everybody who's here today or will see this recording to go check out Julia's amazing articles on her Journey homepage, which is phenomenal. And with that, I just want to say thanks, everyone, for joining today. Julia, we'll see you again soon. And have a fantastic weekend in Serbia or wherever you may be around the world. Thank you, Julia.
So much, Tim. Bye.
Bye.